former British soldier who was awaiting trial for terrorism offences says he has received no explanation as to why the charges against him have been suddenly dropped.
Daniel Burke was so outraged by the Manchester arena bombing, he volunteered to fight ISIS in Syria with the Kurdish militia group YPG, the main Western-backed force fighting Islamic State.
Well, Daniel was accused of terrorism by the UK authorities. He spent 8 months in Wandsworth prison, but in a dramatic turnaround, early this month, the case collapsed and he was freed. And Daniel joins us now from Manchester in his first television interview. Good morning to you, Daniel.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us this morning. So, look, as Charlotte said, the reason you wanted to go out to Syria in the first place is you were so angry about what you'd seen with the Manchester arena bombings, which was such a tragedy. But when you realised, when you sort of started to try and get out to Syria, did you ever expect what you found when you got there? Just how tough was it?
It's a lot harder than what most people think it were. Obviously, I've served in the British Parachute Regiment before in Afghanistan. And going out to Syria, I thought I might have kind of understood a bit about war. I was completely wrong. But it first started off, it went quite slowly. But once you found yourself in the mix of it, it was quite terrifying, to be fair. So,
Daniel, you are a former paratrooper. As you say, you'd been out to Afghanistan, so you have experience of being in a war zone. So often we hear of people deciding to take it upon themselves to go and try and join up with some of these militia groups to try and fight ISIS. That experience you'd had in the British Army, did that set you up for what you were going to face?
Personally, that's what I thought, but only to a certain degree. Obviously, I was in the British Army. The fighting wasn't as intense as in Afghanistan, and it was in Syria. Also, at the same time, in Syria, you don't have what you have in the British Army, which is air support, land support, good logistics. It's that's where it gets really hard. You go days and days without food or water. Sometimes you're wounded, can't be evacuated for days on end. And in the British Army, that would never happen due to us being a lot more advanced. So to see how a third world country, or even a fourth world country, fights in a war compared to the way we fight, it was a big eye-opener. It was a tough going.
And did you ever regret the decision when you were out there? Because, you know, you were facing snipers, bombs, your life was at risk, you lost friends while you were out there, or did you feel that what you were achieving was worth that?
Oh, no, it was definitely worth it. Best way to describe it, a front line over there, your enemy's in front of you. Afghanistan, you never actually really had a front line. So every centimetre, every inch you was taken of that land, you were liberating the people that have been oppressed for the last 4 years since ISIS taken over. My area's operations were Deir ez-Zor down in the south. Now, as we push forward, push ISIS backwards, the civilians would come out, and what they would do is come behind us, and they would be taking off the burqas, burning them, and some of the hugs that you got, and just seeing those people being liberated day after day, that paid for it, really did.
So I wonder, though, Daniel, because, of course, you've come home and been accused of terrorism by going out there in the first place. Did you ever think that that was a risk you were taking, that you could end up in trouble with the authorities when you tried to come back?
When I first went, no. Because by this point, no one's really been arrested apart from Jim Matthews. But that's for other reasons as well. The first person that got told he's going to get questioned when he returned home underneath the Terrorism Act, that happened when I was actually out there. So we always knew that possibility might come around, but it wasn't in stone. And that became a true fact that every person that came back from the Middle East would be arrested as a terrorist and questioned.
And while you were out there, one of the things you charged yourself with was getting information against ISIS and actually handing that to British forces and trying to help them in some capacity. So it must have been sort of a double heartache when you come back and you're being accused of terrorism against the Allied forces, when actually you've been doing everything you can to try and support them while you're out there helping the militia.
Of course it was at the time. It really was heartaching. But when you look at it in hindsight, you can't really blame the British Army. You can't blame the counter-terrorism unit, which is the CTU. What it came down to in the end, it was the CPS. They've got a personal vendetta against people like myself. they basically are the law, and they don't like other people taking the law into their own hands.
And how did it feel for you then when you're sat there in prison, you're being labelled a terrorist, you know, you've been through all that you've been through, and yet you were then facing a life sentence?
That's an hard one to try and put into a few words. I was angry, really, really annoyed. You don't really tend to sleep at all because you know for a fact you're innocent. And that's one thing I liked about my case. All I had to do was tell the truth. Just go straight down the middle. Don't try and veer off or try and bend the truth. Just say it how it is. So in that aspect, it was really good. But at the same time, it felt as a hidden agenda behind my case that was pushing this case forward. Because even the legal team, when they looked at the case at the beginning and most of the evidence, they couldn't see why it was even in prison and why this was even happening. But the fundamental fact was it was happening and being pushed forward at a rapid rate. Now, as you know, about 3 to 4 weeks ago, they applied for bail and they got turned down because CPS had overwhelming evidence against me that's futile to even bother giving me bail. Then 2 weeks after that, I was told there's not enough evidence and my case was being dropped. The thing I wanted to know is what happened in between those 2 weeks that completely changed his case upside down.
So for you as well, it's about getting clarity about exactly what happened here, because the CPS have said it's not their function to decide whether a person is guilty, but to make fair and independent decisions, and that their legal test for a prosecution was no longer met in your case. So what do you make of what they've said about this?
Well, what they said about it, all the information they've had since the beginning of my case was available within 14 days of my arrest. So that's technically before Christmas. I got remanded on I think it's the 20th of December last year. Now, all the information that this case has had around it, that was all available on the 20th of December with my explanation. So the way I see it is, what's changed between the 20th of December and today? Nothing's changed. The evidence hasn't. My story hasn't. They could have dropped these charges a long time ago, back at the CTU in Birmingham, before he even got charged. But they kept on pushing and pushing this case in a direction that made no sense to me.
Daniel, I can't imagine what that was like to be turned down bail because they had overwhelming evidence, and then 2 weeks later suddenly have so little evidence that they can't go forward with the case. You've been on a real roller coaster throughout this entire experience. I guess your thoughts have to turn to the future and how you make the best of the situation and how you move on with your life. What are you hoping to do?
Well, I still need to get my life back together. Unfortunately, I still have none of my stuff back. When I got arrested, I was actually driving to Spain because I own a big plot of land out in Spain. That turned into like a small rehab centre by using glamping pods. And that's for people that are suffering with mental illnesses, such as PTSD. And the place that I'm making isn't just exclusive to YPG members, but it's also for people that worked in the MOD, in the police services. I even invited the CTU officer to come down, because there's a CTU officer that I met back in 2018, and he actually witnessed the Manchester Arena attacks, the aftermath, and it deeply affected him. Yeah. So I want to set up a small unit over in Spain where people can just come and relax when they find themselves on a cusp. And that still is my goal, that I still want to do. But I still need to get all my stuff back from the counter-terrorism unit. They've still got my vehicle, all my solar panels, generators, credit cards, mobile phones, you name it.
And are they giving you any indication of when you will be able to retrieve your property?
No, nothing yet.
Nothing yet.
And can you get compensation for this?
No compensation either. They denied everything and they get away with it scot-free.